Hello all, we'll get started in a little bit once more folks join.
Hello, everyone.
Hi all, I think my system might be working today. Maybe the gremlins are gone.
Yes, perhaps. It's great.
Yeah, what I found out happened is that a System Connect webinar that I had 2 days prior had taken control of my microphone. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to wrestle control back. Technology, you gotta love to hate it.
While we're waiting, I'll go ahead and pull up the agenda for today.
Hey, folks. Thanks for making time to hop on this Friday. Apologies, I'm a little late. I was fighting with Zoom. Well, we can just quickly go around and do our round of introductions. If EJTF members could introduce themselves first, and then we'll go from there. Whoever wants to start. If you can say your name, pronouns, and where you're from, what organization you're from, that'd be great. Just a quick intros. Hey folks, Joel, he, him, his, chair of the EJTF.
Hey, this is Bob Collin, he, him, his, Vice Chair, EJTF.
Yeah, hello, this is Valentin Sanchez, Community Outreach Worker with the Oregon Law Center. Pronouns he, him, his.
Jim Kreider, Eastern Oregon, just a professional citizen.
I like that, Jim, professional citizen. This is Hui, he, him, pronouns, the Executive Director of Opal Environmental Justice Oregon, member of the EJTF.
Any other EJTF members on? Okay. In that case, we'll just jump right into business. We've got some agency updates, so we'll go ahead and just jump right in. Start with the Oregon Department of Forestry.
All right, thank you very much. Ryan Gordon, I'm the Family Forest Land Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Forestry. And I'm joined here today by my 10-month-old daughter, Hattie. My wife had to work today and she's pretty fussy, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we're gonna get through this. So I appreciate your patience. Andy White would normally join you. He was unable to be here today, so I'm gonna try to provide an update. There's been a lot to talk about. So it's going to be tough to fit it into 15 minutes, but I'll try to hit the key points that you asked for and do my best to answer questions, or at least write questions down and get back to you at a later date. Is it possible for me to share my screen? I did put a little PowerPoint together.
Yes, let me just make sure you have permission, Ryan. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
What are we doing? Is it there?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I borrowed the base slides here from our protection division, so it has some dramatic pictures in it. So I just wanted to start briefly with the fires. I know you all received a written update from the Oregon State Fire Marshal's office. And they did a pretty good job of covering that event. I took a look at that. But just briefly, you know, we had as I think everyone is aware, we had a historic weather event on Labor Day that brought a combination of extremely dry fuels, strong east winds with low relative humidities. And the result were a number of both natural and human-caused fires across the landscape. And those are captured here on this map. Essentially, in that period of time, resulting from those fires, we burned nearly 1 million acres in Oregon, lost about 4,500 structures. And the breakdown on that too is about 600,000 acres of federally owned land, 275,000 industrial, 100,000 acres of non-industrial private forest land, and around 25,000 acres of Board of Forestry owned lands, primarily in our Santiam State Forest. This event was pretty unusual, one for the record books for sure, in terms of our normal expected acres burned for that fire year. And in fact, of the 25 largest fires known in Oregon's history, 5 of them occurred during this event. And this just gives you, I've been sharing this graphic around, it's way too much for a Zoom presentation here. It's really great to print it out. It's really interesting. It has a lot of really good history and science worked into it, but it gives you some sense of the magnitude of this event in comparison to the number of acres burned on ODF protected lands over the last roughly 110 years, even in comparison to the Tillamook burns in the 1930s. And if folks are interested in this graphic, I'd be happy to provide it to all of you in a PDF format so you can digest it. So what has all this meant for ODF? well, and for, I mean, and for the state, you know, and I can't necessarily do a great job of representing the full response and recovery, but I can talk a little bit about it from ODF's perspective. We definitely had to reprioritize or refocus a lot of our efforts. The division I work in, the Private Forest Division, has primary responsibility for implementing the Forest Practices Act. And there's a lot of salvage logging going on right now, which is really stretching our capacity. And there are some other concerns I think that are worth highlighting as well. One of them primarily is seedling availability for all landowners, but particularly for smaller non-industrial private forest landowners who were impacted by these events. And there's also going to be a shortage of capacity, I think, within the sector to help landowners. Whoops, got the mouse. To help landowners both with technical assistance as well as just the capacity in terms of a workforce to help with all aspects of both cleanup, salvage, and reforestation. So if we kind of pull out from that a little bit and talk a little bit about the recovery effort statewide, again, I can't speak to that in great detail. I did spend a couple of weeks at the Emergency Coordination Center, where OEM and FEMA have been working with all the state agencies on a coordinated response. And to date, a lot of that has focused on debris cleanup. So in addition to housing and sheltering people impacted by the fires, folks who lost their homes, that's also focused on a lot of debris cleanup and hazardous waste disposal to this point. And FEMA has been providing assistance as well, you know, direct financial assistance to folks who have been impacted, as well to public entities who lost infrastructure in the fires. A little bit closer to home at ODF, we're participating, or we're helping to co-lead State Recovery Function 7, which focuses on cultural and natural resources. And that group is being co-led by ODF, OWEB, and DEQ. And it's just really in the last couple of weeks started to get really organized to begin what we all hope will be a good coordinated cross-agency effort. And my particular piece of that at ODF has been my involvement with this ETART analysis, or Erosion Threat Assessment and Reduction Team, which is an opportunity that's been offered to us by FEMA, and it's brought in federal agencies that are from the Forest Service, National Weather Service, Army Corps, folks who typically work on bear analyses and similar burned area analyses on federal lands, helping us complete that work for the state and private lands that were impacted by the event. And that work is wrapping up here in the next week or so, at least the initial phases of that. And it'll be a really good starting point for that recovery task force to start to understand and prioritize needs across the landscape and begin to connect funding opportunities with those needs. There's also been a lot of really great discussions about, really looking at these fires at a landscape scale, working across ownership boundaries so with our state, federal, and private partners to really put resources where they're most needed to have the greatest impact to help protect those communities and the human health and safety issues that are downstream. A couple other things I'll mention real quick. I already mentioned, we lost about 25,000 acres of the Sandy Am State Forest in the Beachy Creek fire. And I know that our State Forest Division is working hard to assess that damage and begin to adjust their management plans to get it on a path towards a trajectory towards recovery. And my day job for landowner assistance is really in the spotlight right now. And you know, we're certainly very short on capacity to meet this need, and are looking to partner with OSU Extension, with NRCS, the Farm Services Agency, the Forest Service, and local cooperators like SWCDs and watershed councils to help meet that need and connect landowners with the assistance programs that are available for them, specifically for forest restoration. Oops, get myself back over here. So shifting gears now, I'm probably running behind on time. But you all had also asked me to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 1602. That is a bill that was passed by the legislature during special session in June. And it's the result of a collaborative agreement between the conservation community and forest industry to make some changes to the Oregon Forest Practices Act. It's like some of my wife's files are going to be processed and shredded over here, but it's keeping her occupied. We'll deal with that later. So some of the immediate changes that are underway right now and anticipated to go into effect on January 1st of 2021 include increased buffers around homes, schools, water intakes, and streams for pesticides applied by helicopters. Along with that includes expansion of our forestry electronic reporting and notification system that creates a system allowing subscribers to receive notifications, timely notifications. So within 24 hours of a planned application by helicopter. And we're also expanding our stream buffer rules for salmon, steelhead, and bull trout streams. So this was a process we went through a couple of years ago, putting in expanded protections for those streams in Western Oregon. And those will now be expanded down to the Siskiyou georegion. And finally, after some of this initial activity, there is another plan in place for more mediated discussions between the conservation community and industry to review and make recommended other additional changes for the Forest Practices Act. So we have a strike team of sorts in place within the division right now that's working hard to move these changes along on the timeline. And the one piece that will move a little bit slower is that the notification piece, because we work with an external contractor on that, and it's going to take time for them to build the technology and retool ferns to handle that need. Finally, wanted to conclude with the State Forest Habitat Conservation Plan. This one's a little bit less familiar to me. If Andy White were here, he could do a much better job, but they've supplied me with some good talking points. There's a lot of words on the screen here, I know, and I believe you all have been following this conversation. Essentially, in November of 2018, the board directed the State Forest Division to work on an HCP for 640,000 acres of Board of Forestry managed lands in Western Oregon. And in October of this year, so last month, the division took a draft of that HCP to the board, and they provided direction for them to continue moving forward with the next step in that process, which is a Nepa analysis. And that Nepa analysis is expected to begin in March of 2021 and take about a year. That's a federally led process. But at the end, the hope would be to have an HCP that would provide protection for 16 different species, 9 aquatic and 7 terrestrial. So as that process is proceeding, the division is also going to be continuing their efforts to develop an updated forest management plan for state forests that would be complementary to the HCP. And the division in particular wanted me to express to this task force its appreciation for your engagement and support of the HCP, and encourage your continued engagement in their conversations around both the HCP and the updated forest management plan. Then they provided the link here if you're interested in visiting the website, where you can get sign up for email updates and other details related to the HCP. So those are the materials that I prepared, and we got there without too much interruption from Ms. Hattie. So thank you. Happy to try to answer any questions.
Any questions from the task force members? And thank you so much, Ryan, for that really quick and thorough presentation.
Bet. I'm glad we survived it. I was pretty nervous.
He was great.
Well,
I've got one quick question, if I could, Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are there any consideration of stream buffer rules for Eastern Oregon?
That's a good question that I won't ask Marganne to provide an answer because she works for ODA now, but when she worked for ODF, she would have been the perfect person to direct that question towards. That's one that I would really feel most comfortable if I got back to you on.
Okay, great. It's not an immediate question, but just, as it comes up, there are issues out here as I hear different people talking, and just if there's anything in the pipe or anything like that, it'd be nice to be able to make people aware.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up. I'm not aware of anything specific on the table right now. I know that it is a sort of an ongoing conversation, but I can try to get any specific details and follow up.
Okay, great. No big rush.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Do you anticipate any large sort of budgetary shortfalls or gaps that ODF will potentially need to help us recover? I know there's going to be, some significant investments from our federal delegation as well as from the Oregon State Legislature, but I'm just curious, from your perspective, are there any big things you're worried about that perhaps we should know and perhaps can bring up to the governor or other folks?
Well, I think that's really a big statewide question that's larger than just ODF, and probably should mostly defer to the governor's office to try to field that one. There's definitely a lot of uncertainty around agency budgets in the next biennium. And I know for us at ODF, that has provided some challenges around staffing. We've been operating under a hiring freeze right now with some of that uncertainty. There were reductions to our budget, which the governor did restore by vetoing some of those reductions, and that's definitely helped us out in this biennium. When I look further afield, there is a lot of the potential for a lot of federal funding available to help us recover from the disaster, but there are typically match requirements. And a lot of that has to be, federal dollars almost always have to be matched with non-federal dollars. And I think that's where we probably as a state faced some of the greatest challenges. And I think I'll leave it there and see if the governor's office wants to say more.
I thought that was a perfect response, Ryan. I don't have much more to add right now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a quick question to ask really quickly. Is ODF working with the PUC regarding the causation of fires in regards to electrical transmission lines over forest lands and how that's being handled?
Yeah, so I can't comment on the specifics of any of those investigations, but we do investigate the cause of all fires. And we typically, uh-oh, somebody's got something in their mouth. We typically coordinate with the state fire marshal's office on those investigations. And so yeah, the short answer is that we're following up on those, but I can't speak to the specific details of the investigations. So kind of a lackluster response, but.
Sure.
Great.
Well,
Anybody?
Thank you for that.
yeah, if I
Sorry.
may, I do have just a couple of quick questions. SB 1602 will go into effect at the beginning of next year. And so I'm just wondering if ODF has any outreach strategy to inform our communities about the new laws and regulations. And so just to ensure that they have the information, I know that Bob added in the comment section that some of our coastal communities were having big concerns around pesticides without notification in their neighborhood. And then the second question I have is, so it sounds like the reporting or the notification system is not quite set up yet. And I'm wondering whether there will be an opportunity for our community to provide feedback to ensure that we have a system in place that really works as intended.
Yeah, those are both great questions. And again, another one, unfortunately, I don't know, I'm not familiar enough with the specifics. I will follow up with our public affairs program and the folks who are leading 1602 and have them respond back to you. Sorry, I can't provide, this is always the problem when you guys get me instead of Andy. It's hard for me to provide detailed answers, so.
Yes, excellent. If you can just get us a response, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I might jump off here depending on how things go.
Sounds good.
Appreciate the time. Let's see here. I need to stop my share. Oh, you got it. Okay.
Great. Perfect. Well, now we'll hear from DQ.
All right, thank you, everyone. This is Stephanie Calderon with DEQ. Sorry, take my glasses off to reduce some of this glare. Thank you. So today I was asked to attend on behalf of DEQ to just talk a little bit about the request for proposals we recently issued, and that's related to effectively our Rules Advisory Committee and engagement related to climate policy. I have some information from my staff on this, but as well, if there's further questions, I was going to capture questions today. Matt Davis, who I can provide his contact information through Amira. He's the best contact for specific follow-ups on this, but I will do my best to answer questions today. So this request for proposal was issued, and it is entitled Engaging Impacted Communities in Climate Policy. For the state of Oregon, the way that individuals and organizations can sort of bid on these contracts or express interest is through ORPIN, the Oregon Procurement Information Network. I, as a state employee, you still just Google it. It's ORPIN. In that system, it is, you can search by what contract opportunities agencies have available. This is the only one out from DEQ right now. Additionally, it is in that system as DEQ-1213-20. So this was released, I believe, yesterday, and will close on Monday, December 7th. For anyone to provide a response for the proposal. There's a question and answer thing, period, associated with state contracts. These are clarifications. So if you or an organization was interested in it, they would have until November 25th to issue those questions. And those are done, again, through that ORPIN system. And again, the final deadline for submitting the full materials and the outline is there with the RFP of what that requires. I was asked to repeat the funding opportunity number, and I'm going to state that, and then I realized I can also say it into the chat, which I'm going to enter in the chat. So that is DEQ-1213-20. And so for folks who are on the Zoom and can see the chat, you should see that come through for me. So thank you. And what this is the purpose is to award contracts, and DEQ is anticipating 2 to 3 contracts to be awarded. And the value of each of those contracts will be somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 each, to community-based organizations to help build community capacity to engage in DEQ climate-related rulemakings. And this one specifically, because of the timeline associated, we'll start with the cap and reduce effort. Related to that, the Oregon Environmental Quality Commission will meet next week, next Thursday and Friday. And part of that, as one of the action items, will be a proposal for the membership list for the Rules Advisory Committee for the cap and reduce rulemaking effort. That is item C on our agenda, which is next week. So that'll be on Thursday, November 19th. And I'm pulling up the agenda right now. I'm the commission assistant, so I really should know this. Around 11:30 a.m. Again, accessible by Zoom or by telephone call-in for folks who do not have access to the Zoom platform. And that Rules Advisory Committee will be working through the process. That's just sort of a related element that I wanted to make sure that the task force was aware of. And that's just the appointment of that committee. The formal rulemaking will convene once that committee is appointed and folks begin to meet a little bit later this year. So through this RFP, there's specific activities and deliverables for any successful bidder or the person who receives the contract. It's community education and engagement. That's around climate policy generally. Community capacity building. What this could look like, as folks know, is understanding what the government process is, how the government processes work for receiving comments, and how to get folks engaged with that. So it's a practice and learn skill, and one that unfortunately communities with environmental justice concerns are often under-resourced to do. Developing materials, culturally specific education and engagement materials, whether these are culturally specific materials in terms of language access, or even just addressing issues coming from a culturally specific basis, and understanding that the traditional status quo of government engagement and education may not meet the needs of our communities. We're also asking, as part of this, that the folks who are the successful vendors develop a best practices manual. Obviously, this is specific to sort of this cap and reduce, but what we've seen before, and I think actually, Bob has noted, is these are a lot of things that our communities can use in many other contexts. This is a great opportunity to take this particular contract, get additional value going forward for DEQ and other state agencies. Additionally, there's some monitoring and communication elements, policy development, and then DEQ is also very open to any vendor coming through with additional strategies or other proposals. So this is not to be taken as an exhaustive list. I will put a note, I do have open on another screen, which I'm not sure how well the link will translate, so I'm going to apologize now, the ORPIN link. And so that I will put in the chat to panelists and attendees, and I apologize, I'm not quite savvy with ORPIN, so it may not come through appropriately for all, but hopefully you can search by that number that I put in the chat earlier. Like I mentioned, probably 2 or 3 contracts between $70,000 and $100,000 each of those contracts. That funding is variable, obviously, based on the scope of the proposal. Initially, DEQ understands this to be projected for a 9-month scope of work, with the concentration of the work to be January through June of 2021. However, there is opportunity for extension, and I believe it's up to 18 months total duration for this. And so again, that final deadline, just one more time, is Monday, December 7th. That proposals must be submitted through that ORPIN process and structure. And at this time, I think that's all I have in terms of just sort of the information to relay. And I welcome any questions, feedback, or things that I can pass along to staff at this time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Stephanie? And thank you, Stephanie, for being here, sharing that information.
Thank you all for having me today.
Are you planning at all to try and, I guess, have any force multipliers for this programming? Are you thinking you might partner with perhaps some other agencies, or have other conversations with folks? As I recall, I talked to your colleague about this RFP process a month or two ago, and he talked about the possibility of trying to get additional funding for the program, just recognizing that community-based organizations are under tremendous pressure right now because of COVID and everything else that's going on in the world. So I guess I'm just curious to hear if you all have had those conversations about trying to add additional resources or capacity to community-based organizations as they engage in this work.
Unfortunately, I can't offer probably what is a full or satisfying answer, but I can check in sort of with staff. The intent here is to award the money to a community-based organization because of the specific recognition that DEQ, coming in as a government agency, has neither the expertise nor the necessary level of trust with the communities that we most need to engage with. The hope is that by laying out as much as possible within the deliverables and the request, that we can sort of provide and garner proposals that fully fund. I before I came to DEQ, I worked in nonprofit land. As many of you all know, oftentimes you're issuing a request for a proposal, or you're bidding on a contract, and that contract may not fully fund what you actually need, the infrastructure supports to do the work in a robust way. So you're cobbling together pieces of funding. So we're hoping that both through the somewhat time-limited scope and as well the variable nature of the potential contract award, that we can provide funding that would fully support these organizations, as best we can within the structure right now.
Thanks, Stephanie. Anyone else? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to ODA.
Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Margam, I'm going to start this, right? Oops, Margan, you're on mute. Yes, you're muted.
Oh, press *6 if you're on the phone, and that should unmute you. Here we go.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah, go ahead, please, Barbara. Barbara and I are sharing our.
Yes, Margan and I are going to ping pong back and forth. A little bit about myself. I'm a full-time farmer out of McMinnville. I'm the chair of the Yamhill Soil Water Conservation District. I chair the Soil Water Conservation Commission, which is what we're here to talk to you about today. I sit on the State Board of Agriculture, and I also sit on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. They're all pathways because of the commission, and you'll hear about some of the dedicated seats that are held for natural resources in some of these boards. So we're taking the opportunity today to tell you who we are and see how we can engage a little bit more with the task force. Conservation districts were originally formed during the Dust Bowl era, and it was to combat severe erosion problems caused by intense farming practices. And so soil and water conservation districts are government entities that provide technical assistance and tools to manage and protect land, water resources in the United States. So fast forward to today, and some of the programs that we serve on are changing with the urban-rural interface happening. So we're seeing a change in demographics and our clients. So just having getting a little more engaged with different organizations is only going to make us a better commission. And the conservation districts in the state of Oregon have varying capacities. We have 13 conservation districts that have tax bases. So varying from solid funding of $5 million a year to several conservation districts that are only on soft funding. So the capacity is completely varied across the state. So Margan, I'll pass it off to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Barbara. Again, I'm Margan Allen. At least now you can hear me. I manage the water quality program here for Oregon Department of Agriculture. And just so you know, I did in the chat box put a couple key links there from our website about soil and water conservation districts and the Soil and Water Conservation Commission that Barbara is on. So you might be wondering about how but the commission and ODA tie to these districts. For us here at ODA, the relationship with the districts is important enough that it's monumented in statute, and a key function of that is that in a sense there are, I think of them as our fungal hyphae, our network for helping us to implement the agricultural water quality program. Another key function that we serve is to provide elections administration in partnership with the counties for the districts. So it's been a very busy time of year for us, getting all of that elections work process so we can get elected folks like Barbara confirmed in their positions and their work moving forward. So that's the relationship with ODA. Back to you, Barbara.
So the Soil and Water Conservation Commission provides assistance and direction to all Oregon 45 conservation districts. We advise and develop policy with the Department of Agriculture and its to help administer its duties. And the chair of the Soil and Water Conservation Commission has a dedicated seat on the State Board of Agriculture, and it is a voting member of the State Board of Ag. And that is unique across, it's not in every state that there is a dedicated seat. So it's an honor for me to serve in that capacity also. Margan?
All right. So we are really pleased to be here today. Normally you would be hearing from Christina Higbee for Oregon Department of Agriculture. And she helps facilitate us getting time here. And I really appreciate such a quick time turnaround for us to get on your agenda. So I really appreciate that. So Barbara and I will talk through two key ways that we would love to learn more about how your task force can help us reach out to and get improvements, or changes, and hear, how can we get more engagement with the districts and deliver more services in a better way. So, districts, they provide a really wide range of pathways for community engagement and conservation actions all around the state. It can be as much as being a consumer of conservation education and technical assistance, actual active participation in voluntary conservation actions. Employment and contracting is another way. You can apply for and receive conservation education and project funding. And as I touched on earlier, folks in our state can be elected to positions in governing the business of the districts. And those folks then, in turn, the ones who are in those elected roles, providing that oversight, then become eligible to be on the Soil and Water Conservation Commission, just as Barbara is. So again, ODA and the commission would love to hear your thoughts on how districts around the state can expand and deepen their engagement with local communities. And Barbara will tell you another key opportunities.
Yeah, we see a targeted issue at hand that this task force might be helpful with. We as a commission have decided to take on a back to basics and review the whole ORS statute, ORS 568. I've been on the district I've been in conservation for 16 years and I've never read the full document. I know bits and pieces of it when I know where to go when I need an answer for a certain question. But so we're taking it piece by piece. We're going to take a year. We have 4 meetings a year. So we're putting it, chunking it into manageable pieces. So it's not so overwhelming. But there's some criteria for becoming an elected official at the county level. And there are at-large positions and zone positions. And they are, as Margan said, they're elected positions. So the at-large positions do not have any qualifications. I mean, not any restrictions to it. At-large is any member of the county. The zone directors have some criteria, and it is own or managing 10 acres or more, and reside within the boundaries of the zone in the county. So there's other alternative ways to becoming an elected official. You can be appointed an associate director, and you can be an associate director for a year and then get appointed as a zone director if you live in the zone. There's many different pathways to becoming a director. But we have been hearing from some citizens that they feel like some of this criteria is too restrictive. So we're exploring that. Oregon Association of Conservation Districts and the commission embarked on a survey of all elected official directors in the state of Oregon. And we had a 69% survey results participation, which is an amazing figure when you do surveys. So we're compiling all that information and reviewing it next week at our commission meeting. So that is one piece that I feel like we could become more engaged with this task force. So
right,
we'd like to
so
just
those are
we'd like to explore that topic.
And I did, just so folks can see it, I put in all the different pathways for the elected positions there, so you can see it in text.
Sure. I think Bob had a question. Bob, you want to say it out loud?
Yeah, land ownership as a condition of an elected office is very anti-friendly to EJ. How many here own 10 acres? Probably less than on our hand that we can count. So that sort of goes back to feudalism and then slave requirement during slavery times, how they restricted access to voting. So this land ownership requirement, I can see from a rural context of why they'd want it with soil and water. I've had family members serve on these types of things. But the land ownership from an EJ perspective and from a young farmer who's renting property perspective is very onerous. And that's something I'd be happy to help talk about. Thank you.
Well, and to reply to that, it's own or manage 10 acres or more. So you could be you could rent land.
Thank you. I didn't know that. Appreciate it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think the sentiment still stands. I think in general, we talk about sort of the history of just land management and, oftentimes, unless you're as you mentioned, manage or own property, it's really difficult to engage in these type of situations. And so one of the things I would encourage you all to just think about and explore is, how can we get more feedback from your average community member that may not be so plugged into, a lot of these systems, and even us as EJ advocates, we sort of learn by the cuff of our pants, right? And so over the last few years, I've gotten to know a little bit more about some of these districts and how we manage water. But even us as sort of professional EJ advocates, sometimes these issues can be difficult to access to the average Oregonian.
Well, we often say that we're Oregon's best kept secret because we stay out of the front page of the newspaper. But we do want to deepen our relationships with all citizens of the state.
Sure. Anyone else have any questions or comments or thoughts?
I have a quick question to ask. In regards to land ownership or land leasing, does it have to be land in production, or is it just land in general?
We do not, the word production is not in there. So the way I view it, it could be a parking lot. It could be an apartment complex, the way it's stated right now, really.
So if I had an agreement that someone wanted me to run for that position, I knew a landowner that had that land, I could just sign a lease agreement for $5 for the entire 10 acres of land a year, and it would still count as a lease, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I might have a little bit of a silly question. I'm trying to, I know friends that have land in conservation easements. Is that the same thing that we're talking about here?
Well, I mean that the owner of the land that the easement's on could run. Easements is just you're giving up development rights. So is pretty much what an easement is. You're keeping it in conservation. You're keeping the conservation values at the time of signing the easement.
Okay, because like we've got a place here called the Lad Canyon Marsh and Glass Hill, and ODF and W has an easement, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation does, and then a private landowner's just put several thousand acres into that batch. So that would all be considered a land conservation easement and under your jurisdiction?
No, it's not under our jurisdiction. It's the easement holders is who the jurisdiction is.
Right, because I just looked up our conservation board, and I don't know any of them.
What county?
Union County.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to think, because I know this individual, he lives in the area I live in, and we're kind of helping him with the easements and doing some things. And I'm just trying to place the agencies, and probably multiple agencies the easements fit under, but I'm trying to put a little puzzle together into my head. I'm not sure what other parts of the puzzle even are.
Well, he's still going to be the landowner. He's still,
Yeah.
so he could still be a district director, but there's a lot of easement holders. Our conservation district holds a lot of easements in Yamhill County.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I know a lot of people go in with the trust and they do stream restorations and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then they go ahead and then put that land into a conservation easement also.
Correct.
So, but is that more of the feds? Because I hear people always complaining about the feds and not allowed to bring animals in to graze the land to reduce the grassland fire loads.
Every program's different. Every land trust has a different mission. Every entity who holds easements it's all between the landowner and the easement holder. We have some very prescriptive easements with landowners at our district.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess whether it's with the federal or the state or what level, so there's different pieces of the puzzle on different levels.
Correct. And it's up to the landowner. The landowner has the right to choose who they want to hold the easement. They have to find a sponsor, I guess is the better word, is using sponsor.
Okay. Well, you've triggered a new train of thought for me, so I'm going to him and do a little bit more discussing and learn more about conservation easements, federal, state, and what have you.
Well, reach out to me anytime. We're pretty good at it in Yamhill County.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to need help.
You're welcome.
Go ahead,
I have a
David.
quick question. Another quick question is tribally owned land, does that also count? And also does CRP land count?
Yes. They both do
Thank you.
count.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just one last quick question. In rural areas, 4-H groups, the Grange, FAA are grassroots rural organizations that are intimately involved with soil and water issues. Marion County has great funding for 4-H that we passed. How closely do you work with these rural grassroots groups in your programs? Or do you know if it's different everywhere?
It's different. Every district has their own mission and their own partners that they've developed.
Great. Anyone else? Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad we had a chance.
Thank you.
I'm glad we had a chance to talk, learn more about what y'all are up to, and I'm sure as we move forward, we'll have opportunities to engage more and hopefully get some more folks, to know about Oregon's best kept secret. So, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you a
Yeah,
lot.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think that's it for agency reports, Chair.
Thanks so much. I think in that case, we'll switch over to EJTF business, but I want to give folks a little chance to take a break so we can reconvene at 2:05. If you want to get up and stretch, drink some water, try to be back here in about 5 minutes. We'll reconvene. Switch over. Thanks, y'all. hop back. I think we'll just wait for David and Hui to hop back on. Another minute. We'll get started. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. We'll see if Hui and David pop back in. I know we got some EJTF business, but I also see we have a guest here. Of Kathy from Unete. Valentin, I think here's something that you're hoping to chat with us about, and I'm always glad to see Kathy. So, hey, Kathy, welcome.
Hey, Joel, good to see you.
Good to see you. So, what's going on?
So, want me to go ahead and start?
If I may just quickly,
All right.
Please.
just mix a couple of statements. So Kathy has been extremely involved in working with our Latinx communities in Southern Oregon. And as we learned, there has been a lot of wildfires impacting vulnerable communities. And so we wanted to invite Kathy so she can speak to us about kind of the work that they've been doing and how the wildfire smokes has been impacting, our Latinx communities, especially our, forestry workers and agricultural workers. So Kathy, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Valentin. So like Valentin mentioned, my name is Kathy Kazee and I work with Unete in Medford. Unete started in 1996 and we are a farm worker advocacy and immigrant rights group located in Medford. Basically, Unete started on our couch many years ago when literally it started on our couch where farm workers were being promised a bonus. And then at the end of the season, they told them they decided they just weren't going to pay them the bonus. And so basically it kind of got rolling from there. And what Unete used to do, we used to do a lot of farm labor organizing, but then with what we used to be called INS and now we call ICE, there we were beginning to see a lot of raids, what I call raids, roundups at the end of the season, because again, growers didn't want to be paying bonuses for workers. And so instead of jeopardizing the their stay in the United States, we decided that we really probably have a larger impact if we started organizing parents in public education, because we really felt like parents could, if they learned their rights and responsibilities in public education, then their children would be more successful. And even though the school system here was very inequitable for Latino youth, in fact, when we really started organizing the kids, there was about a 47% graduation rate for Latino AX students here in the Valley. And so through our efforts of organizing the parents, we actually, testified in things at board meetings here locally. And it actually resulted in the fact that they did not renew the superintendent's contract because they were not serving the Latino AX students properly in our district. So that has been very popular. We've had a lot of kids we've done mentoring programs with, who have gone on to college and now are coming back now and are working to support other Latino AX students through college and even through the high school programs and things. So that was a big success, I believe, for us. We also do a lot of cultural programming So when we see that families who maybe are unable to return to their home countries because of immigration status, then there's a lot of things that the children miss out on here culturally. And so we found that by offering programs like Dia de los Muertos or Las Posadas, things like that, in conjunction with the local school district here, we've been able to open up lines of communication with the parents. And that was really our number one goal with the cultural programming, because we saw that there really wasn't that line of communication between the children. Their children were often used as interpreters, and so they had knowledge of different aspects of the parent's life that I, as a child, never knew, like our financial situation or my mother's health situations, things like that. We just didn't know. And so we see like a power shift there as well, that when children need to become the interpreters and they have access to this other information, and they essentially tell the parents what's going on. And so through that power shift, we see some negative responses there. And so we really believe that by opening up these lines of communication through these cultural programs, we've seen that that's really helped, because they can talk about what they did in Mexico and during this posadas, and then the children kind of get an idea of what that might be like. And also luckily the school district was very supportive, and they're doing programming as well related to those Dia de los Muertos and also with the posadas at the same time. So the kids were kind of getting a double dose from home and at school too. Other things we do are things like Get Out the Latino Vote. As you saw, the BIPOC vote in the United States was very important in getting our new president elected, or almost elected, president elected, kind of. And then Georgia came through today. So that's just another example of BIPOC folks getting other folks out to vote. And then we also do educational programming around legislative actions that impact immigrants. Like for the driver's licenses, for example, we work closely with HOEL on many of these campaigns, also pesticide application regulations and things like that. So Unete is made up of, we have 12 staff right now, which are it's like 3.5 FTE, and of those 12, about 75% are first generation immigrants from Mexico or other places in Central South America. All of our staff is bilingual. So some of the things that we offer are Oregon Health Plan applications, navigation services. We do probably, might say like 1,300 navigation services throughout the year, helping families get into needed services, or referring them to physicians, referring them to therapy, mental health services, things like that. We're also part of the Oregon Worker Relief Fund. And so we've done, I just counted 1,370 applications so far for worker relief. So we've brought about $2.5 million into Southern Oregon for undocumented workers here, and also people who are currently in quarantine. With housing, we've received funds through one of the local emergency service offices here to be able to provide housing support, as we see that housing is going to be a big issue this year. We did COVID wrap services as well, and we've had so far 485 people that we've been offering wrap service to, which means like taking food to their home, referring them to community agencies, a variety of things. And then right now, the COVID rate in Jackson County is exploding. We used to have like 5 cases a day, 20 cases a day. Yesterday was 134, and today I saw there's like 97 new cases again. So we're one of the counties that's at the pause level with COVID. And then of course we do advocacy services. So advocacy service meaning wage theft, injured worker, sexual harassment, any types of things like that we see in the workplace. So unfortunately, we all know COVID happened. And because of a lot of our constituency are considered essential workers, they were on frontline jobs, hotels, ag workers, things like that. So since a lot of them were also entrepreneurs, small business owners, there was a lot of reduction of income that was coming in. And a lot of housekeepers, people were doing lawn, garden maintenance, small construction jobs. And so people were essentially living off of their savings that they had stored up from the previous cycle. The ag cycle here is like from March through November. And so people were kind of at the end of that savings. And so now we've seen that a lot of the workers and things down here have used up all those savings due to COVID, just because of, like I mentioned before, just because of that big reduction in income. And then another thing when I mentioned before was with education, with distance learning, if the kids already weren't at a huge disadvantage just because of language, socioeconomic situations, access to technology, now with distance learning, it's even worse. We have kids who are living in hotels that don't have access to hotspots and there's a lot of Latino kids down here who are really just basically falling through the cracks. So then came September 8th, and it was a really hot, windy day that day, and the fires started roaring through the valley, literally roaring through the valley. And they kept going for about 3 days. And through that, there were approximately 2,600 people who were displaced. And through those fires, there were 12 trailer parks that were destroyed. And the trailer parks were the main source of affordable housing for agricultural workers and hospitality workers in the valley. And so all of those literally are gone. Just like, I don't know, you've probably seen pictures and things on the news, but the trailer parks, it's just metal. I mean, it was really impressive. We drove through some of the trailer parks, and it was so hot in the trailer parks that the windshields of the cars actually just melted over the tops of the steering wheels, and the tires, there's no rubber even left. It's just wire. So it's pretty incredible the amount of heat. In fact, when I was speaking with the sheriff, he was telling me that when they went to do the missing persons reports or investigations, not reports, that he said the sustained temperature was around 2,600 degrees for hours in these parks, and it was like a crematorium. They didn't find any human remains. That's all they found were bone fragments because it was so hot through there. So another thing, when so out of the evacuation centers, because it was right at the beginning of another big surge of COVID, then we were really concerned that the evacuation centers are going to be another source for like a super spreader type event. Excuse me. And so there were about, I think at first there were like about 400 people who were at the evacuation centers who were being housed there in congregate living situations. Other issues down here, because housing was already at a 1% vacancy rate in the valley, there's nowhere to rent. There's literally nowhere to rent in Medford. And now we're seeing a lot of apartments being offered for rent that are in areas of Medford that most people don't care to live on. They're in busy intersections. There's a lot of mold and things growing inside the houses. You can see like daylight coming, in under the doors and things. And they're renting those for like $1,500 for 2-bedroom apartments. So not only that, but we're also seeing a lot of, they'll be taking applications and $70 an application. And we've seen these same apartments now open for 2 months. And we don't know how many, we have no idea like how many applications have been submitted at that $70 rate, but I'm sure that they're making decent money off of that too. And so like I mentioned, the congregate living situations, we saw many families moving into homes with relatives or friends. One home had as many as 21 people in it, 5 families living in it, hotel rooms. There was also like 11 to 12 people living in one hotel room with two like a double bed situation type thing. And so another thing was a huge fear again that the COVID cases were just going to really just start to explode around here. Again, reduced access to education. The kids weren't able to get any type of, because they were in hotels, or some were living in cars and some were living in tents. They didn't have access to Wi-Fi. They didn't have access to any of that for school. And another thing we saw a lot of was small business owners who had lost their tools. They lost their supplies for cleaning. Basically everything was just destroyed. So one thing we did see when we were, it was kind of interesting talking to the families who were out at the evacuation centers. The first day we were at the evacuation center, they called us because prior to the fires, we were on a part of a task force that was preparing for the arrival of the H2A workers from Mexico for our pear harvest and that peach harvest, which starts in about August. So we've been talking since about June, like what were we going to do if there was a huge outbreak of COVID? And so fortunately, they had already set up a space out at the expo center that was set up for the workers in case there was a need to quarantine workers at the evacuation out of the expo center. So they already had cots, they had blankets, they had everything. It was all set up. So just as a fluke, that was pretty much already ready to go. And so the day of the fires, they called me and they said, we have a group of like 9 farm workers here, and we don't know how they got here, and they don't know how they got here or why they're here. So could you come out and interpret for them so we can see, what their needs are and what they're doing? So we went out there, and we went out there to see them, and we asked like, how did you get here? And they said, well, the sheriff came, and because it was a very windy day and with OSHA regs, they couldn't be up on the ladders because it was over 30 mile an hour, like sustained winds. And so he said the sheriff told us to get in the back of his truck. So we hopped in the back of the truck. They didn't know where they were going or what was going on. And the sheriff, excuse me, took them out to the evacuation site. So luckily they were safe there. And luckily that part of the valley, they didn't burn. That part, their camp was in good shape. So that night there were several other camps that did need to evacuate again to the evacuation center. And unfortunately, one of the sites that was out on east part of Talent, the owner's homes and the farm, it did burn. Luckily, the place that they were staying didn't burn. It was a trailer, but when they had to go back to work, they were forced to like bathe in a stream that was by their home, and they didn't have any type of electricity. One of the workers there actually was positive COVID and had just gotten out of the ICU where he had been for almost 2 weeks. And so it was very, it was kind of iffy, I believe. And then the fact that they had to bathe in this stream that basically ran through irrigation. It was basically an irrigation stream that ran through fields with who knows what type of livestock or other pesticides and things they were exposed to. So they, one thing that struck me the most was when I was out at the evacuation center, there were workers out there and I could tell, I knew that they had on masks that weren't rated for smoke. So the day that they were out there was like the 10th, I think. The smoke was so thick in the valley that the sun was red. It was just a big red ball when you could see it. I mean, sometimes it was so thick you couldn't even see the sun those days. And these guys had on masks that weren't rated for smoke. And so not only were they being exposed to just the smoke in the air, but they were also being forced to work 8 hours a day, sometimes 10, 6 days a week out picking with these masks that weren't rated for smoke. And you could tell that they'd had the masks on for a while. They were dirty and you could tell that they were moist, probably because of them sweating or whatever. And so that basically renders them useless. And one thing I'd like to mention is that there were masks that were available free that were N95 masks that were free for growers in the valley. And I'm not sure why those growers chose not to access those masks. So these workers, once they went back to their camps, they're also in the cooking facilities and things now a lot of them are outdoors. So they were cooking outside, working all day outside. They come back in the buses, they're basically transported in school buses. And so the school buses don't have air conditioning. So they had the windows rolled down. So they're constantly exposed to smoke in the transportation. And then when they go back to the camps, there's not AC, there's not like central AC. And some of them didn't even have fans. So they have to have the windows open all night to cool the areas off, because it was about, I'm going to say it was in the 90s those days as well. Some of the smoke helped keep some of that heat out, but also the air quality index there. A couple of those days, Medford had the worst air quality index in the world. It was like over 492. So not only was it, so they had, I would say, so all these guys had like 5 things strikes against them in their housing and transportation, even to cook all day at work. They were out exposed to all this smoke and without the proper equipment for them to protect themselves. So I think some of the things that we've been able to offer through the fires are, we've been able to offer food vouchers. Yesterday, we gave out food vouchers to the tune of like $17,000 worth of food vouchers and clothing vouchers for families who are victims of the fires. Again, we mentioned like navigating health systems. Also, a big issue right now is mental health for these families. When we did intakes out at the evacuation center, I probably did about 40 of them. And out of the 40, there were 3 families that said that they didn't feel like they required some type of mental health service just because of the levels of trauma that were going on. There was one woman who sticks out the most in my mind, and she said that the emergency response system did not work. It was never called. There was nothing going out in Spanish. Everything was in English, and it was very limited. It's basically what you saw, like the little trailer thing at the bottom of the TV screen. And it was updated like every half an hour. Well, this fire was moving very quickly. And at points the law enforcement says they didn't even have time to get out of their cars. They just had to talk through the loudspeakers on their phones. They get out of you guys just need to leave. So this one woman told me that she remembers that the sheriff knocked on her door and said, you got to get out. You need to just get out of the car now. The fire is like 3 minutes away. You have to get out. And so she got her kids and in the car, and she said she could feel the heat. She said, can I go back in and get my papers? He said, no, you have to just get in the car. We have to go. So she got her kids out, 3 children, one that has special needs, really bad anxiety and other issues. And so they put him in the car. And she said she could feel the heat of the fires inside of the car. And she just prayed the whole time that nothing would happen to the family on the way out. So there's a lot of these stories that are pretty intense with these families. And so these kids, they want to go back home, and especially kids with some type of special needs don't understand why they can't go back home, and where's their little dog, and where's the animals and things that perish in the fire. And so the need for mental health services down here is huge. And like I mentioned before with distance learning, now we have kids who are living all over the valley, and with like McKinney-Vento laws, they should be being provided with certain they should be being provided with what they need to be able to access education. And I need to commend the Phoenix Talent School District. They're really doing an amazing job to try and reach out to all these families. I mean, they have people on the ground everywhere, but still there's other kids who are still like falling through the cracks, or at daycare centers where one daycare provider is trying to provide 8 different platforms for learning to the kids who are in her daycare. So there's a lot that's still going on. There's a lot right now. There's we have 253 families still in Red Cross hotel rooms, and that should be ending around the end of December, and there's nowhere for them to go. So we're really concerned about housing and want it to be like housing that's developed and taking into account strongly the needs of the community and what they want, not just what other people are assuming is best for them.
Sure.
So I probably talked too much. One thing I just want to say is this last story is that there's a lot of, through all this building, there's so much resilience in this community. There's a woman who said that she came to this country with a backpack on her back. She had one change of clothes. She was able to have a family. Her children, a couple of her children graduated from college. She had her home. She had everything. So she knows it's going to be a struggle, but she knows that she can do it again because she's been here before. And so I think there's with that level of resilience and with the Latinx community here in the Valley that now is more knowledgeable of resources and things, hopefully that rebuilding process will be a little easier for them.
Thanks so much, Kathy. We got half an hour left, but I just want to quickly just propose to the rest of the group that we draft a letter and send it to the governor's office with some of the comments you heard from Kathy today, as well as our own recommendations. I have family that lost homes in Phoenix fires as well. Kathy, you know me for several years, and one of my grandfather's brothers lost his home. Several of my dad's cousins, family members, but we definitely need to do what we can to try and get some relief for Oregonians. So I propose that we draft a letter and just send it to the governor with some of the concerns that we heard today. So.
First and foremost, I want to thank you, Kathy, for you and Unete for the work that you guys have been doing in Southern Oregon. I know that when the wildfires started, we started receiving phone calls from workers, and we also started receiving information from a local public health department that we should stay in-house. And so, because I'm working from home, I had the luxury of staying inside, shutting down the window, closing the doors, keeping my children inside, healthy, safe and healthy. But I was receiving phone calls from workers calling me, Valentin, I'm working outside, it's really smoky, you can smell. And it was really hard for me to tell them, I'm sorry, there's no law that protects you. And so I think that we should continue to have this discussion. As we saw in the ODF fire history, we'll continue to get wildfires, and I don't want to put these underneath the rug and say, yeah, let's come back next year when the next wildfire season starts. So it's a discussion that we should continue to have, and it sounds like Kathy also raised issues on the emergency preparedness and evacuation plan. I think language accessibility is really, really critical. And so it's another thing that we should continue to discuss. We want to make sure that our rural communities can use our platform here to raise their concerns. And so I think there's many issues that we should continue to discuss. And I'm in support of writing a letter to the Office of the Governor on the issues that Kathy raised here today.
Sounds good. I'll drop something and send it around. But thanks so much for joining us, Kathy, and for talking to us. We'll chat soon. And with that, folks, we have about half an hour left. We've got still a few things on the agenda. Mira, could you pull up the agenda real quick? Okay, perfect. So we got EJTF business and some public comment. So I guess we'll just start off. What time is it right now? It is 2:32. So maybe if folks are okay with it, I'd like to maybe do public comment first and see who's on, and then we'll spend the rest of the time doing EJTF business. Are folks okay with that? Okay. See, is anyone here for public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, I guess not. In that case, we'll move on to EJTF business. Just having a discussion about our interactions with state agencies. We have two questions here. It's a couple of questions. How many of the natural resource agencies that we work with do you interface with? How frequently? And what ways, take away from these experiences? I think Jim, the ones proposed these. So Jim, perhaps you could just, take us through this discussion and we'll see what we come up with.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Let me kind of reframe this a little bit, because these discussion questions were also part of a larger suite of questions that I had kind of, put out to the group to ponder. And I guess, some of my questions are, and I had written to folks about it, is they were the 4 questions that Amira recommended holding for agency reviews. And I guess I was more thinking out loud to the members of EJTF about the questions. There was never really an intention at that time for them to become an agenda item, nor for them to go directly to the state agencies. I think in my note, I kind of put out, at least in my ways of working, and I guess I have to adjust to the committee's ways of working, is that, usually I'm used to throwing things out there, having kind of a dialogue with folks, and then further refining the questions and how best to move forward. So I was a little surprised that I kind of wrote an email expecting a give and take, pro and con discussion, then to see them kind of end up as items that went to agencies to give us responses, and that this is on the agenda to discuss. So I guess my first question is how is the best way to go about posing questions for us to discuss? Is it just kind of send them in and they end up going to agencies and are agenda items? Or is there an intermediary dialogue processing section that occurs to boil them down so that there's a general understanding of the purpose and therefore then the focus of the questions? Okay. Because I guess for me, you're going to get a lot of process stuff. You've already heard it from me and you'll continue to hear it from me. I'm kind of a process person. And, from doing organizational development work, looking to kind of develop an internal culture of how do we do work. And I guess the answer is you just kind of do it and you figure out, and if people don't like it, you hear from them. I don't know. I'm looking for a dialogue.
Go ahead, David.
Jim, I apologize, but I did not see those questions beforehand or preface, but maybe when sending those questions out and you want to discuss among EJTF, maybe it just should be clarified in the email that we add this to agenda to discuss amongst EJTF only, and how these questions relate to our current activity. So maybe just further clarification, because maybe it seems like it was a miscommunication somewhere in there. And again, Jim, I don't recall seeing that email. So if it was sent to me, I apologize for not seeing that earlier. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, David.
Okay. Thanks, David. That is good advice, that I should preface the intentions of the questions and maybe a discussion route before it going into print and going out to others. So thanks. That's good advice.
But in that same vein, I mean, now that we're on the topic, I work with a few agencies here and there, but it's mostly, from what Amira sends out, or sometimes Courtney sends us things over, and I know Bob is participating in a number of conversations. I would say for me right now, it's about, once or twice a month, but it's because, Bob and I are on some advisory committees, and, there's the climate cabinet and there's other things. And so I would say it's less a one-on-one in terms of natural resource agencies, and more so, different advisory committees and meetings in which the EJTF is solicited for advice. But at least not me, I'm not having one-on-ones with heads of agencies or other individual agency operatives. I don't know about you, Bob.
No, I haven't. And because Joel is a community leader and can't always come to state agency meetings, I step in representing us, but he's the chair. He's really the one that would make any decisions in these contexts. We're on a lot of advisory committees. I probably meet with all the natural resource agencies in different amounts 2 or 3 times a week. But the question does need refinement, because what does work with mean? I meet with them in a meeting and they're there. I work with community groups that work with these state agencies. Where does that fall in? And I work with tribes who may or may not work with these state agencies, who may want to or don't want to. So the degree of the questions are rough hewn, and as Jim said, a good start. They need a lot of refinement to get answers that are meaningful. Because it's a question is, how are our activities engaged with the mission of EJTF? And that's a good question, but it's all over the place. We all do a lot of things. I'm sure Huey, Val, Jim, yourself, Joel, all of us do lots of different things in terms of what has been labeled environmental justice, which collects all the other injustices of housing, education, employment, and transportation. So I think that it's a good question to ask in terms of how much our activities outside this volunteer organization contribute to the mission of the organization, but it might be that our activities take priority over reporting our activities, given the nature of COVID, given the nature of the economic impact on our communities. That's how I feel, that those activities are more important than me reporting my activities. And that some of us may also feel that way, but that doesn't mean the question is not a good one, Jim. That's an important question. It's just that the circumstances now are overwhelming a lot of us, or at least me anyway. So that's how I feel. Thank you.
And I guess somewhat my intention is thinking of the strategic plan and the different agencies we work with, that if a pattern, say, emerged, that certain individuals interface with more organizations more often than others, those might be people that could be a more liaison-ish. Because I know, like for myself, I work a lot with the PUC. I work a lot with the ODOE, but they're not within our kind of wheelhouse, so to say. And in my thinking was that if we have certain individuals that are more familiar with certain agencies, when it comes to liaisoning with them or working with them, it's an organic relationship had already been established. So I guess that's kind of what I was looking at there, is within the agencies we work with organically, are some of us already interconnected with them? And therefore, if specific needs were required to work with them, who would be the logical task force member? Because a lot of this kind of came out of us having proxies. and having proxies for organizations. So kind of being new to the proxy idea and kind of working with some of the agencies, my thought patterns were kind of moving in that direction to try to kind of do a little bit of an analyzation of it. So that was the intent behind it. And also the same with the 4 questions that I had to the agencies, because had noticed from the last meeting and talking to some folks, layoffs are occurring, morale's kind of down, everybody's pedal to the metal and the future is uncertain. So part of my other questions there was kind of just get a snapshot of how's the agency doing? How has COVID affected their ability to serve the EJ communities? You know, and a bunch of us are out there in the trenches and know that. Some of us are in trenches in one part of the state and another part of the state. Even with the same agency, those trenches can look somewhat different and have different solutions to similar problems. So more of my questions there was to kind of get a sense, how is the agency dealing with it? We know they've had to go to online meetings versus public meetings. A whole new skill set has had to be developed around Zoom. How do you do breakout groups? You know, how do you facilitate that? And so generally it was like, you know, for the agencies to kind of just give us an insight as to how are they reaching the communities that we want or we are representing, and how can we help them do it better, or how can we understand the limitations or hurdles that they're facing. So that was more of the intent behind those sets of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Gene, for explaining that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, in terms of myself and you know, through my work, we do a lot of interaction with the Oregon Health Authority, also Oregon OSHA regarding field sanitation, labor housing regulations, you know, their complaint-driven system that doesn't work for our agricultural workers, and wildfire smoke working conditions. And with ODA, we work a lot around pesticide issues, in particular pesticide drift. And because we're a big nonprofit organization, we have you know, different people interacting with those agencies, but we try to work as a team. And yeah, I think, you know, it is important that we engage someone who has that organic relationship, who may have more knowledge about the natural resource agency, who can provide, you know, feedback, guidance to, you know, whether it's our chair or vice chair, so that we can have a much more productive meeting, and also to save time. You know, if we have a specific item that we want to discuss, maybe it's not the head of the natural resource agency, but maybe it's a different person. So having that knowledge about the natural resource agency, I think it's helpful.
Anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
Yeah. Once we close out this, I do have some questions I would like to ask that occurred from my my electronic failure meeting. Just some follow-up questions or catch-up questions.
Sure. Go ahead, Jim. I don't think anyone's.
Okay, well, okay. I was just wondering, because we had just talked about writing a letter to the governor. And one of the things that I had hoped that was talked about last time, but we were looking at flow charting the letters to the governor and which ones went, the response, and has anything been flow charted or discussed about how the letters work?
I don't think so, but I think last time Amir had mentioned a little bit about sort of the process that happens when letters get that way, but I don't think we've flow charted anything yet. Bob, were you going to say something?
Yeah, we didn't flow chart it, Jim, but we had a lot of discussion about the accountability of that process and what happens and where they go and where they don't go. And there were, again, lots of questions, but we didn't do a flow chart. And I think with this letter, we could maybe do that as an example of how to flow. Joel will write the first draft, he'll send it around, and then he'll deliver it in some way. And we can just document how we do it this time and go develop the flow chart from the flow of the last letter, perhaps. That's just a thought.
That's usually the best way. Take something you're doing and just kind of monitor it. And then, you know, what works well, keep it there. What doesn't, discuss how to do better.
Yep.
That would be great, because that was one of my questions. And then I was wondering if there was a follow-up on the Easter Day farms, the CFOs. And I just asked that because I do have one group, Oregon Rural Action, that is working in that area. And, you know, and Kristen had mentioned that we had asked them for an extension of the time frame for the public hearings, but that wasn't granted. And I didn't know if there was any discussion on that at all. And I didn't want to bring it up when the ag folks were here, because I felt that I didn't want to bring up something if it had been, you know, discussed and put to bed.
I don't think we did discuss it, Jim. And I think that is an important issue, that when we ask for more public participation and engagement for our communities, that we follow up with a letter when we don't get it. The agencies have saved a lot of money on public participation under Zoom and COVID, and the Water Resources has publicly said through their director that they've saved a lot of money on this. So I think that if you felt strongly and the rest of the group felt strongly, Jim, if you wanted to follow that up with a letter, you know, about the public participation request being denied. And I think, I don't know how to phrase it right now. I can't take that on right now, but I think that we didn't talk about it and we didn't do anything about it. So that's how that's.
I'll do a follow-up and put together a timeline of kind of, you know, from our meeting, what we asked for, and then, you know, what progressed up to the point that I write back to everybody. So at least we'll see what happened, how it happened, and then we can determine what to do, if anything. So, okay. Another question I had is, I had a question about the minutes of the meetings versus the audio. And I'm not sure if that was discussed or anything like that.
I don't think so.
Okay, because, you know, I understand people's time constraints, but I do think it's fairly important to have a written documentation, minutes of our meetings. And I know that the prior meeting, we got audio files, but to be perfectly honest, who's going to go back and listen to an audio file for something? Oh yeah, that happened 45 minutes into the meeting. You know, whereas if you can scan minutes, that kind of gives you a context. And if you really need the content, then you can go listen to the audio. Because I just, from my point of view, I have to do that a lot. Take audio, run it into ADA to get it translated, and then go through, and then you have a transcript of the meeting that you can then submit as a legal document in a proceeding. And I do that a lot for ODOE. But so therefore I was wondering, you know, if we did have that discussion, because I would strongly urge that we have some type of written minutes for every meeting. The details up for debate, but we need to have a paper trail. Since we are a public agency, I don't think we can get away with just doing audio files, but I don't know the rules in that section.
So I can kind of speak to that. So with our public meeting law, what we need to do is just record it. So we just have to have recorded meeting information at some point. And my understanding is that it can be audio and video, and these videos are on YouTube and being recorded. And I've been advised that that is enough. What I'm kind of hearing from you, Jim, is that you want written documentation as well.
Well, I would like to have a discussion on it, because I believe that, you know, from the publics that we represent, are they going to have the resources to hop online, find a file in a YouTube archive somewhere, and then listen to a 2-hour meeting to find the 15-minute section they want. Whereas I think having a paper trail, and again, there you go, what language is it going to be in and how accessible will it be? You know, there are issues with the paper copies too, but I personally feel uncomfortable just leaving an audio file. But I also want to be empathetic to staff and your lack of resources and time to do things. But whatever we do, I want to have us, I would like us to have a vote that is on the record that we are officially stating how we will do with complying with the open meeting law, whether we do the bare minimum or if we have some type of written minutes. And I don't know if when we stop doing minutes, if there was a conversation and a decision made, okay, it's not okay to do minutes anymore, we'll go to audio, or how that happened. I'm unaware. But in any case, I think there should be a coherent discussion amongst the task force about the pros and cons of written minutes versus audio files.
I don't think it was necessarily a case of we just wanted to stop doing it. I know Miles hopped off, and then I also know that we had that Amira had some other support from folks that were doing minutes for a long time, and then they sort of switched over to audio because of a lack of support. But Amira, I mean, feel free to hop in here. It seems like it's just an issue of capacity, not necessarily not wanting to not do written notes.
Yeah, so there's two things where, again, we don't need to have written notes because there is a video, even though I understand what you're saying, Jim, about public's, there could be a lack of capacity for folks to review a whole movie online. And secondly, as Joel was saying, there really isn't a lot of support to help right now, especially with everything that's going on in Oregon. We have basically no resources at this point.
Okay, and that's a pretty good reason. But I also think that, it should be a motion made, have some deliberation. And I know I could agree for a short period of time to not do written minutes because of where we are, but would want it to be revisited when we get out of this, because I become a computer person, but I work with so many people that are paper people, and they're tactile. They need to have that, and for some people I talk to, it's a security blanket, and so I just get concerned if we don't do that, and I get more concerned when we do things and we're not conscious about what and how we're doing and the effects, positive and negative. And then the last thing I just wanted to bring up was our public image thing. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but every meeting I'm going to bring these things up. But the letterhead and those types of issues. If because of COVID, it's an issue that's better left tabled, then let's make a conscious decision and table it for X amount of time. But if it's something that can be done and we can still move forward at some type of pace, let's do that. But again, let's have a conscious decision which direction we're heading.
We're going to say something, Bob?
Yeah, I do strongly agree with Jim on written minutes, because as attorneys know, a letter or something written is something you can take with you and carry it around without having to plug it in. And in our communities, and I know everyone here knows this, that we're just lacking resources, but something that's written can often be more easily translated in part without other people standing around, that groups in private can sit with themselves and look with a piece of paper and try to figure out what's going on with that. So I really understand the lack of capacity going on now for written minutes, and it perhaps is a boomer going Zoomer type of thing, but I am in the boomer working to be a Zoomer, and I like the written aspects of them myself, so I can share those segments with other people. Also, written notes lend themselves to blind people being able to see them through Braille, writing in that type of language. So in terms of the accessibility of vulnerable people to what we do, I think written minutes might have a stronger outreach when we have the capacity. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, gang. I think in terms of the letterhead, I think it honestly, just like the stated logo and the EJ task force, I think would be enough to carry us through until we can do something else. Amir, I don't know what you think about that, but that's what I do for the Eugene Human Rights Commission. We just have a City of Eugene logo. We just write down the title. So curious if it would be okay for us to just use the State of Oregon seal and then sort of, Oregon Environmental Justice Task Force or Governor's Environmental Justice Task Force, and have that serve as letterhead.
Yeah, I asked Courtney to look at that item, but it seems like, and maybe I'm interpreting this incorrectly, but what I'm hearing Jim bring up is, some sort of decisions made between members about like how that would look and how to proceed with these processes. And I'm not sure I'm necessarily hearing that. So I'm hearing, like, for example, like Bob and Jim saying they would like written minutes, and it goes back to a capacity issue. Courtney's not here. She's not able to help every single time with minutes. And yeah. I guess it's just like, I think what I'm hearing from Jim is sort of a confirmation needed around whatever the task force needs, whether that's a certain look of a letterhead, business cards, written minutes, or processes for getting letters up, etc. And I'm not sure I'm hearing confirmation from folks.
The other thing too is like,
what you want.
Sure. The other thing too is like right now we don't have quorum. So even if we wanted to vote on something, we wouldn't be able to. So I guess what I would say, Jim, is, let's try and, have another meeting. But I think our next meeting is going to be, when's our next meeting scheduled, Amira? This is supposed to be December, or not again until 2021?
Yeah, because our last meeting was the third meeting, right? So we could have another one in December.
Yeah, so I would say let's try and shoot for one in December, and maybe that one will just be focused on trying to get enough EJTF members to have quorum so we can vote on some things and make some things formal.
Okay, well, what I'll do then is I'll put together a series of motions.
Great.
Send them out to people. The letterhead's done. I submitted it color black and white.
Sure.
All I needed was an email address. That was not the long one on the website, but Courtney now has her email address there as the EJTF. I don't know if it will take an act of some higher being to get us our own email address out of whoever creates them, but it would be nice if we could have an EJTF at whatever, Oregon State Gov, or however it all goes. But I know IT people are speaking to a person higher than the almighty because they control the neurons. But I don't know if Elmira, if that's something that somebody at whatever office it is could give us a generic email address, because that would then go to the next step of getting individual members one. Because once we have EJTF at whatever, then we just stick a name in front of it, or however the state does their naming conventions. But I don't know, maybe that's a bridge too far at this time.
Sure.
So there is a state email for the task force. I don't think there's a state email for each person, because I was talking with Courtney about this last time. There's some dynamics around giving each person a state email address, especially if folks term out. And so you have like all these state emails, but I'm not 100% clear on the limitations of that. But I did ask her to work on all those items.
Yep. So in that case,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, the other thing too that we could possibly do is, I know for other commissions I've been on, I've just made, hrc@gmail.com, because same, at least on my role as commissioner for the City of Eugene Human Rights Commission, we don't get government emails since we're not government employees. And so I don't know how it works with the other advocacy commissions in MIRA, if they get their own special email, or if they have to do something similar. But I'd be curious to see what the advocacy commissions or even the sustainability board or some of these other folks, like how what they do in order to try and make sure they're in compliance and they have an email that's, sort of has a purpose of serving for the commission or board that they serve on.
Yeah, so, David and Valentine are on, would be curious if David has any perspective on that. I know he mentioned business cards for sure.
Sure. But I'm also aware of our time, so I'm wondering if folks want to close out. Valentine, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my only concern with having each member have their own email address is, we have a chair and a vice chair, so I feel that a lot of the issues that are being raised or issues that are being, presented to the EJ should go directly to chair and vice chair, so they can designate who they want to respond. And I'm just afraid that they may reach out to Valentin when I have no clue what they're talking about. And so I think that will be my only concern.
I'll also chime in on this topic in regards to cards. So what the Okapia does is that we have a business card that states that we're a commissioner. It's a standard, template. The email address actually goes to a central email, and once it goes to the central email, the staff at that point delegate that question to who they think is appropriate, but actually reach out to say, hey, look, we got this email from somebody. Is it something that you're knowledgeable about and want to respond and participate in on behalf of Okapia? And we respond back, yes, we can take that on because we have background or we were working on something similar to that. So the email goes to a general email. It does not go to the chair or the vice chair. It goes to general staff, and then the staff can help. That may bring that email up in a discussion as well if they need to for a general meeting, or they can just do it behind the scenes and say, can you do this? Phone number is the same as well. It goes to a central phone number to the staff. So our public information, like my email for Okapia and phone number, do not go out publicly. It's only held by staff, and then they connect us directly with the appropriate person when appropriate. And that helps also alleviate the issue of, like you said, getting emails sent to you, or if the chair's position changed, because they have to issue new cards all the time. That's for contact information wise. Our cards are very generic, and I can go look for one and send a copy to everybody to see what it looks like on the EJ side. But I think that's probably an easier and better way to handle it. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, John. Well, it's 3:05, folks. Unless people have anything burning they want to say, I think we should close out.
Well, it's Friday the 13th, so, let's hope we can get through the day without a major bump.
Yep. All right. Go ahead, Valentine.
Yeah, before we adjourn, I think it would be helpful for me to kind of start thinking about our next meeting, and also ensure that we get more participation from the other EJ task force members.
Can we try December 11th? Amir, how does that look? It's 4 weeks from now. Does that work for other people?
It works for me.
It wouldn't work for me right now. I've got a filing deadline on that day. And filing deadlines are always terrible days.
About December 18th.
That's good for me right now.
I also know folks do, yeah, I mean, any other year I would say no way, but no one's traveling, so we're all stuck inside. Does the 18th look okay, Amira?
For the time being, yes.
Well, let's
There's always
just
something that could come up, but if I get it on my calendar now, that would be great.
sure. Well, let's shoot for the 18th.
And maybe I was going to say, hold on the 11th, because that's an OPUC scheduling deadline, but that docket deadline is under discussion right now.
Sure. So the 11th or 18th, and we'll confirm. We'll try to confirm soon.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, man.